Imagine if everyone around you appeared to be themselves, but were really not. Today, let's review 1978's Invasion of the Body Snatchers. The movie begins with aliens landing on Earth in the form of plant pods. The aliens were from a dying race and need suitable hosts to continue. The movie starts off with Elizabeth, a healthcare worker, who finds a pod and brings it home and lies it down next to her boyfriend. She awakens the next day to find him acting strange. She eventually takes her issue to Matthew Benno, played by Donald Sutherland, her colleague, who invites her to a book signing party. As Elizabeth and Matthew drive to the book signing party, a delusional man hits their car, and then as he falls off of the car, a crowd of people gather around him with no emotion. As he's hit and dies, they walk past him with, again, no emotion. Once arriving at the book signing, David's friend, played by Leonard Nimoy, a psychiatrist, tries to convince her that she's just trying to break up with her boyfriend. Across town, Matthew's friend Jack, played by Jeff Goldblum, and his wife find a bizarre-looking creature in their home which resembles Jack. Later, Matthew pays a visit to Elizabeth's home after finding no answers. She doesn't answer her phone, so he goes over to her home. He breaks in and finds a weird-looking pod that's growing that looks just like Elizabeth. He has to try and save her by keeping her from falling into a deep sleep. You see, the way the aliens assimilate a human is when they're sleeping. Once you're in a deep sleep, you never wake up as yourself. Your former self becomes a shell, and the new you, an emotionless humanoid that has no feelings. Later, you see Matthew speaking with a homeless man and his dog. Later in the movie, the homeless man and his dog, the pods are accidentally mixed, and its outcome is horrific enough to scare Elizabeth, which makes her show emotion. As the movie continues, Matthew and Elizabeth finds themselves increasingly more and more alone, as more and more humans are assimilated into these emotionless beings. The way to stay away from it is to stay awake. The movie does a superb job of isolating you, making you feel as if you're alone, the only human left, when everyone else has no emotion. As Matthew and Elizabeth find themselves increasingly under the scrutiny and suspicion of family and friends who've already been converted, they have to maintain a sense of normalcy about themselves. However, it becomes increasingly more and more dangerous to do it. Later in the movie, Elizabeth's boyfriend, who has been fully converted by now, consults with the converted police and others about what she's up to. Matthew, on the other hand, is finding it increasingly more and more difficult to stay normal and to stay awake. With family and friends changing rapidly, the two don't have a clue as to what to do, so they contact Matthew's friend David, who takes them to a warehouse and shows them his own destroyed corpse. Matthew, in turn, becomes enraged and upset. However, David tries to calm him and let him know that everything is okay. But it's not. This has got to be one of the creepiest films that you could ever watch, even in 2025. I think it still has its impact. As individuals mount against Elizabeth and Matthew, Matthew realizes that the bodies are being destroyed, the original human bodies, that is. As Matthew races to try and find out how many humans have been infected, he realizes that Most of the humans have already been affected. Trying to maintain composure is almost impossible. Keep in mind, he hasn't been asleep for days. His friend David assembles a group to try and take him down and force him to sleep. Later, Matthew and Elizabeth run into her friend Nancy, who hasn't been converted yet. She tries to convince them to come with her. However, they get separated. The movie then escalates into a chase movie. Basically, Matthew and Elizabeth are being chased by the human imposters. You then start seeing multiple humans carrying their own pods. Eventually, Matthew and Elizabeth come across a kid who notices that they're human and starts screaming. This causes them to panic and get into a car with a taxi driver who seems a bit suspicious and wants to turn them in. As the night progresses, Matthew and Elizabeth continue through the town trying to find others who are human. It becomes increasingly more and more difficult for them to decipher who's human and how they can get out of town. As the night progresses and the pods expand, David, who hasn't been asleep for days now, or Elizabeth, eventually they fall asleep. However, Matthew wakes up out of his trance just in time to try and save Elizabeth. Remember, she had already been attempted to be assimilated earlier, but once she falls asleep this time, she turns and literally crumbles in his hands. Just as he looks up, he sees the replicated Elizabeth trying to convince him to convert, who takes him to his friend David, who injects him with a sleeping potion to try and get him to fall asleep and convert. Typically, you see sci-fi and horror movies which dictate a narrative of blood and guts. This movie does not. It's more psychological. It makes you isolate yourself and feel as if you were in the shoes of the last remaining humans. As the movie reaches its final act, you notice a creepy feeling overwhelm you when you see people that you don't know whether they're real or fake. The actress who plays Elizabeth, Brooke Adams, superbly plays her part, but once she's gone, Matthew doesn't know what to do. And in the final act, you see Matthew walking towards the state capitol. It's the next morning. He seemingly has made it. He then hears a voice calling him from the bushes. It's Nancy. Nancy has found him again. As she approaches Matthew, happy that she's reunited with him, this happens. Matthew had been completely converted overnight. And this ends the 1978 movie review of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, starring Donald Sutherland, Jeff Goldblum, Leonard Nimoy, and Brooke Adams as Elizabeth. Please like, share, and subscribe to Where in the World is Frank and Gina on YouTube. Simply type in Frank and Gina to subscribe to our channel. God bless.